What if the intelligence behind reality was never a belief, but a code? What if science didn't destroy the idea of God, but uncovered the very structure of a conscious universe? This is not something happening in distant galaxies or abstract theories. It is happening inside the fabric of reality you inhabit and inside your mind. Without realizing it, you were trained to separate science from the sacred, logic from meaning, equations from intelligence. Yet what feels normal to you may be the result of centuries of conditioning. Ancient knowledge spoke of this long before modern instruments existed. Hermes Trismegistus called it the principle behind all manifestation. The Kybalion whispered its laws, knowing only a few would look beyond the surface. Today, science is approaching the same threshold, finding patterns, order, and intention where randomness was expected. The code was always there. And now, you are about to see what was hidden in plain sight. Imagine that you are watching a movie projected onto a wall. You feel moved, you suffer, you create expectations, you identify with the characters. But if someone turns off the projector, everything disappears instantly. The characters were not things. They were light in motion. Patterns organized on an empty surface. Now think about this with brutal honesty. What if matter were exactly that? What if you, your body, and your story were projections of something invisible? For centuries, science believed that the universe was made of small, solid things, atoms, particles, fundamental building blocks of reality. But quantum field theory destroyed this idea at its root. It demonstrated that particles are not objects. They are temporary excitations of invisible fields that permeate everything. The electron does not exist in itself. It happens. It arises as a momentary ripple in a continuous field. Matter ceased to be substance, it became event. In quantum field theory, fields come before everything. Before the atom, before the particle, before form. What we call a particle is merely a point where the field vibrates. Just as a wave does not exist without the ocean, no particle exists without the field. This is not philosophy, it is the most precise model of modern physics. All observable reality emerges from this invisible background. The solid is only appearance. The foundation of the world is abstract, mathematical, and invisible. The Higgs field, confirmed at CERN in 2012, made this explicit. Particles do not possess mass by nature. They only gain mass by interacting with a universal field. Without the field, there is no weight, no form, no matter. The Lamb shift showed that even the vacuum alters the energy of atoms. What seemed empty interferes. What seemed absent acts. Science was forced to admit, the invisible sustains the visible. Now pause for a second and bring this into your life. If everything that exists is a field in vibration, is what you call fixed reality truly fixed? How many times have you felt trapped, limited, with no way out? How many times have you believed your life was just the way it is? But what if this is only a pattern vibrating in the field? What if what you call a problem is only a temporary configuration, not a final sentence? What changes when you realize that nothing is as solid as it seems? Centuries before modern physics, Hermeticism already stated, "The all is mind, the universe is mental." This was not poetic metaphor. It was a description of how reality functions. If everything emerges from an invisible field, and if this field precedes matter, then reality behaves more like mind than like machine. Thought not as personal opinion, but as organizing principle. Science merely replaced the word mind with field. If matter is not a thing, if everything is field in vibration, then an inevitable and uncomfortable question arises. Is this field empty, or is it alive? Does it merely sustain reality, or does it actively participate in creation? If nothing is not nothing, what truly exists behind what you call emptiness? And what if humanity's greatest mistake was confusing silence with absence? In the pinned comment, I've left you a gift, the free digital version of the original Kybalion, curated by the secret Hermetic team, for those who feel the call to expand consciousness. I write books that explore in depth all the themes presented in the videos, and if you wish to support my work as an author, you will not only help keep this space alive, but also free and independent. Imagine entering a completely dark room with no sound, no light, no apparent movement. At first glance, everything suggests absence, absolute emptiness, as if nothing were there. But if you remain long enough, something begins to change. Silence ceases to be mere silence and starts to have presence. Darkness no longer feels like absence, but like a space charged with potential. Now expand this experience to the entire universe. What if what we call emptiness was never truly empty? What if what we learned to call nothing was, in fact, everything at rest, waiting only for a condition to manifest? In quantum field theory, the vacuum is not the absence of something, but the fundamental state of all existing fields. Even when there are no detectable particles, the fields remain present, active, and structured. They do not shut down, they do not disappear, they do not enter absolute rest. They vibrate, fluctuate, interact with themselves. The vacuum is the permanent stage where all reality happens, the invisible backdrop without which no particle could exist. There is no electron outside the vacuum, no photon independent of it. The entire universe emerges from this active silence that sustains everything without ever being exhausted. This idea ceased to be merely theoretical when experiments began to reveal measurable effects of the vacuum. The Casimir effect showed that two metal plates placed extremely close together in a region without particles experience a real attractive force. No classical force explains this phenomenon. The attraction arises from fluctuations of the quantum vacuum itself, which exerts pressure even when it appears empty. In addition, so-called zero-point energy demonstrates that even in the minimum energy state, the universe does not stand still. Absolute rest simply does not exist. Nothing, contrary to what we were taught, is always doing something. Other experiments reinforced this view in an even more radical way. In particle accelerators, it was observed that pairs of particles spontaneously appear and disappear in the vacuum without any apparent external cause. These are the so-called virtual particles. They do not come from outside. They are not inserted into the system. They do not cross invisible boundaries. They emerge from the field itself and return to it. The vacuum creates, sustains, and reabsorbs. Nothing enters, nothing leaves. Everything happens within it. Science was forced to abandon the idea of a passive void and accept that nothing is, in fact, the greatest generator of reality that exists. Now bring this understanding into your own life. How many times have you felt empty inside, without purpose, without direction, without energy, as if something essential were missing? But what if this emptiness were not absence, but a fertile field loaded with possibilities not yet manifested? What if those moments when everything seems to stop are precisely the moments when something new is reorganizing itself at an invisible level? You were taught to fear emptiness, to fill it at any cost. But what if emptiness is not an enemy? What if it is the space where creation begins? What changes when you stop fleeing from silence? Hermeticism expresses this truth directly and unequivocally in the Kybalion. Though the all may appear to be divided into parts, yet it remains whole. This statement is not symbolic, it is structural. The all does not abandon its creation, does not fragment, does not lose itself in its manifestations. It expresses itself within everything that exists, just as the quantum vacuum is present in every particle, even when it is not perceived. Nothing is outside, nothing is separate, nothing exists in isolation. Emptiness is not the absence of the all. It is its presence, in an unmanifest state, its purest and most silent form. If the vacuum is in everything, if the field sustains every particle and every form, then where exactly do you end and the universe begin? If everything emerges from the same invisible background, what does it really mean to be separate from someone or something? And if the distance between beings is merely an illusion created by limited perception, how do we explain connections that ignore space and time, that defy common logic? If the all is in everything, why do you still feel isolated? And what happens when this sense of separation begins to collapse? Imagine observing the ocean on a calm day. From the shore, you see individual waves, each seeming to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Some are larger, others smaller. Some break closer, others farther away. But if you step back and look at the ocean as a whole, something becomes evident. There are no separate waves. There is only water in motion. The wave is not something independent of the sea. It is the sea in a temporary form. Now bring this image into everyday reality. What if what you call separate things is simply the all moving in different patterns? What if separation is merely a way of seeing, not a truth of the universe? In quantum field theory, this intuition takes mathematical form. Fundamental fields do not exist in isolated regions of space. They are continuous and universal. The electron field is present throughout the entire universe, as is the photon field and all others. There are no real boundaries between systems, only regions where certain excitations manifest with greater intensity. What we call an object is merely a local configuration of the field, not an independent entity. Separation, therefore, is not ontological. It does not belong to the essence of reality. It is merely operational, a practical way of describing phenomena within human limits of observation. This absence of separation became impossible to ignore with quantum entanglement experiments carried out by Alain Aspect and later by Anton Zeilinger. Particles that interacted in the past remain connected even when separated by vast distances. A change in the state of one is instantly reflected in the other, without signal exchange, without traversing space. Distance does not matter. Space itself becomes irrelevant. The only coherent explanation is that, at a deep level, they were never truly separate. What appears as two distinct objects is, in reality, a single system described by a common field. The double-slit experiment, in its deeper version, reinforces this conclusion. Before measurement, the particle has no defined identity. It is neither wave nor particle, neither here nor there. It exists as a superposition of possibilities in the field. Only at the moment of interaction with a measuring apparatus does a definition arise. Quantum decoherence explains how, from this unified field of possibilities, the classical reality we perceive as solid and separate emerges. Separation, therefore, is not the starting point of reality. It is the final result of an interaction process, not its foundation. Now bring this into your personal experience. How many of your life's pains are born from the feeling of being separate? Separate from people, from meaning, from the flow of life, from something greater. How many decisions do you make from the fear of losing, of being alone, of not belonging? But what if this sense of separation is not a truth, but a side effect of how you perceive the world? What if, at a deeper level, you were never truly disconnected from anything? What happens to fear when separation ceases to be absolute? And how does your life change when belonging stops being something you need to earn? The Kybalion expresses this reality with absolute clarity. The all is in everything is in the all. This phrase does not describe a distant spiritual ideal, but the real structure of existence. What physics calls universal fields, Hermeticism called the all. What science describes as ontological continuity, Hermeticism described as essential unity. The idea of the all in everything ceases to be poetic metaphor and reveals itself as a functional description of reality. Nothing is outside the all, just as no wave is outside the ocean. Separation exists only in appearance, not in essence. If everything is a single continuous field, if separation is merely a perceptual illusion, then an inevitable and deeply unsettling question arises. Who observes? If there are no truly separate parts, where does the consciousness that perceives the universe come from? Is the observer outside the field, or is it the field observing itself? If the all is in everything, where exactly does the experience of being I take place? And what does this reveal about the ultimate nature of what you call God? Imagine a mirror facing another mirror. The reflection repeats infinitely images within images, without it being possible to point out where the original begins and where the copy ends. Now imagine that, at some point in this infinite chain of reflections, a question arises: who is looking? This simple image contains a profound paradox. If everything reflects everything, if there is no outside, then reality itself must find a way to perceive itself. Bring this to the universe. If it is a single, continuous, indivisible field, where does the act of observation occur? And what does this say about the ultimate nature of what sustains everything? Quantum field theory describes the fundamental fabric of reality with mathematical precision. It explains how particles emerge, how they interact, how they disappear. But there is a point where science, honestly, stops. QFT describes the field, but it does not answer why it exists. It shows how the universe works, but it does not explain why it is intelligible, ordered, and mathematically coherent. Even more, it does not explain how, from impersonal fields, subjective experience arises the consciousness that observes, questions, and understands. The paradox is born precisely here. A universe made of fields gives rise to minds capable of understanding those same fields. From a scientific standpoint, this is strange enough. A physical system that produces observers capable of formulating laws about the system itself. A field that generates structures that reflect upon the field. Matter, which is excitation of the field, organizes itself in such a way that it begins to ask about the origin of reality itself. There is no need to use religious language to perceive the depth of this. The universe is not merely something that happens, it is something that knows itself through its own manifestations. Consciousness does not appear as an isolated accident, but as a possibility inscribed in the very structure of the field. Quantum experiments had already pointed in this direction. In the double-slit experiment, the act of observation is not neutral. In decoherence, interaction defines classical reality. The observer is not outside the system, it participates in it. If everything is field, then the observer is also field. There is no privileged external point from which reality is watched as a spectacle. The universe observes itself through specific configurations of the field that we call consciousness. The paradox is unavoidable. The all not only sustains reality, it experiences itself through it. Now bring this to yourself, without abstractions. If consciousness is not outside the field, if you are not a separate observer looking at a strange universe, then what are you really? How many times have you felt small, insignificant, as if your existence were an irrelevant detail in an indifferent cosmos? But what if your capacity to perceive, feel, and understand is precisely the way the all recognizes itself? What if your consciousness is not a statistical error, but a function of the universe itself? What happens to your sense of value when you understand that to exist is already to participate in the mystery? The Kybalion addresses this point with unsettling clarity in the chapter on the divine paradox. The all is mind, absolute, infinite, immutable. And later it states, the all creates in its infinite mind countless universes, which exist for eternity. The paradox is explicit. The all is unknowable in its essence, yet knowable through its manifestations. It is beyond all definition, yet expressed in everything that exists. What science calls the fundamental field, Hermeticism called mind not as an enlarged human mind, but as the principle capable of sustaining order, intelligence, and consciousness. If the universe is a field that manifests, if consciousness is the way this field observes itself, then the final question is not whether God exists. The real question is another. What exactly are you experiencing when you say, I? If the all thinks through everything, where does your mind end and the mind of the universe begin? Are you merely a passing observer, or are you the field itself looking at itself for an instant? And what if the answer to God was never outside, but always silently present in the experience of existing? The answer begins here. You are not outside the universe observing something distant. What you call I is not an isolated point lost in the cosmos, but a temporary configuration of the fundamental field recognizing itself. When you perceive, question, feel, and seek meaning, it is not a separate individual trying to understand the all. It is the all experiencing itself through you. Consciousness does not arise despite the universe, but from it. God, in this sense, is not a being located somewhere hidden, but the principle that makes all experience possible, including the experience of asking who you are. Along this path, science was clear, even without using spiritual language. Quantum field theory showed that nothing is truly a thing, that matter is only vibration organized in invisible fields. The vacuum revealed itself as active, creative, full of energy and possibilities. Separation collapsed when experiments showed that everything remains connected beyond space and time. And finally, the observer ceased to be external and became an integral part of the system. The universe is not a dead mechanism. It is a living, coherent, and profoundly intelligent field. Hermeticism never promised easy answers, but it always pointed to the same truth. The all is in everything, and everything is in the all. What physics today describes with equations, the Kybalion already stated as principle. The universe is mental not because it is a fantasy, but because its foundation is closer to mind than to solid matter. The divine paradox ceases to be a distant mystery and becomes a key. The all is unknowable in essence, but recognizable through the direct experience of existing. If you have made it this far, something in you already understands, perhaps not in words, but in feeling. The feeling that you were never truly separate, that the emptiness you fear is, in fact, the field where everything is born, that the reality that seemed rigid is more flexible than you were taught. This knowledge is not merely intellectual. It changes how you perceive yourself, how you react, how you create, how you live. When separation falls, fear loses strength. When fear falls, reality begins to respond differently. If this content resonated with you, like this video so this message can reach more consciousnesses seeking understanding. Subscribe to the channel to continue this path of deep investigation between science, philosophy, and ancient wisdom. Share this video with those you feel need to hear this now, not to convince, but to awaken questions. Initiatic knowledge has always found its way through affinity, never through imposition. And now, leave in the comments a simple but powerful phrase. I recognize the all within me. Writing is an act. Declaring is aligning. When the mind recognizes a principle, reality begins to reorganize itself around that understanding. Observe what changes when you stop seeing yourself as an isolated part and begin to recognize yourself as an expression of the field. The search for God was never about finding something outside. It was always about remembering what never ceased to be present. When science and Hermeticism meet, a belief is not born, understanding is born. And every true understanding transforms. Until the next initiatory encounter, on the path of Hermetic wisdom,